Hi everyone, my name is Peter McKay. I'm curator of contemporary Australian art here at the gallery and curator of Noel McKenna's exhibition Landscaped Mapped. It didn't really need that much curating, it kind of was auto-curating, and what it didn't do itself, Noel kind of did the rest.
I'll have to put in my bill. How much you get paid?
I get paid all right. So what I'll do, we're going to have a very sort of an easy conversation today for this session. We'll open it up to the crowd. So I think my first duty really is to introduce our two speakers. So firstly, Noel McKenna on your left, away from me. Noel is the star of the show. He's been working as an artist for nearly 40 years, originally from Brisbane. But moved to Sydney when he was 23. This is all in the catalogue. I won't give it all away. But of course, he works across painting, watercolour, ceramics, printmaking, a little bit of installation. And his work is held in, I think, all the major galleries around the country, including ours. A lot of private and public collections here in New Zealand, and a lot of collections internationally as well of late. Noel is quite competitive. He's a frequent entrant into the Win Prize. He's won the Trustees Prize for Watercolour 5 times, and won the Win once. No, the Sulman once, and is quite a frequent entrant in the Sulman and Archibald as well. But he did win the 2015 Tattersalls Club Landscape Art Prize here in Brisbane. So. Yes, maybe a quick round of applause for Noel. And beside me in the middle here is Dr. Graham Simpson, Melbourne-based Australian author of screenplays, short stories and novels, most notably The Rosie Project and The Rosie Effect. And you have a new book out too, The Two Steps Forward, which was written by your wife, written with your wife, Professor Anne Buist. Graham came to creative writing at the age of 50. And before that you had a career in IT, IT consulting and data modeling. And I think you actually wrote the textbook on data modeling, is that right?
More or less, yeah.
Very good.
Not recommended. If you enjoyed the Rosie Project, you won't necessarily enjoy data modeling essentials.
No cross-promotion on that one. And perhaps Graham's a little competitive too. In 2012, you won the Victorian Premier's Unpublished Manuscript Award, the 2014 Australian Book Industry Book of the Year, and you've got an honorary doctorate from RMIT, I believe, and that's for your creative writing. Is that right? Yeah. Very good. So if he's not super competitive, at least he's a very high achiever, which is a very similar thing. So I think because Noel's the star of the show, I think I'll start with a question for Graham to warm up the crowd. So Graham, when we were planning this project, we really wanted to do something a little bit different. We wanted to get a non-arts writer and even somebody, definitely from outside the gallery, but yes, a non-arts writer, somebody who hadn't had a lot of involvement in the visual arts field. And I turned to you because I thought that your writing, particularly in the Rosie Project, there's a sort of a matter-of-fact quality to it. There's a literalist quality, and I thought that maybe that had something in common with Noel's work. Was I right in that? Do you have a similar sensibility when you met and had a chat? Was it chalk and cheese? How did we go?
Well, you got it dead right in getting a non-arts writer, because I was routinely bottom of my class in art at school, and have not really engaged with the visual arts very much. So it was an enormous challenge. As you know, I said right at the beginning no, and you said, well, okay, we want someone from a quite different field. So I felt the thing that might draw us together was the generic creative process. How did we go about doing things? But your comment about the literalness, if you like, I worry sometimes that literalness often translates into accessibility, and we often confuse accessibility with simplicity or lack of depth or superficiality. Not so. Just because something is, speaking here of books, just because a book is accessible doesn't mean, at first glance, doesn't mean it won't reward hard work. Hard work, though, doesn't have to be a precondition for quality, and I think we sometimes forget that.
Yeah, good. I must admit as well, your former life as a data modeler is what I thought, oh, there's so much data, there's so much information on Noel's maps, but after a while I realized that the kind of data modeling that you would do in IT was probably somewhat more sophisticated than... So was there anything in that, or was I just totally off the mark there?
Well, there was, but possibly not the way you put it. I think there is a certain kind of person who's fascinated by collections, by classification, by completeness, finding all the things of whatever kind, and those people tend to be male. And I think data modelers are often drawn from that group of people. It's a professional. And what Noel was doing with this collection, certainly with some of the paintings, is quite clearly an interest in enumerating all of the BP stations or the racetracks or whatever. So I felt it wasn't so much that I was interested in his techniques for doing it, but what led him there in the first place.
Good. Okay. Well, no, we can talk about your interest in data modeling a little bit later down the track. But first, I thought I might ask you about just the effect of walking into the show and seeing all those works together for the first time, because you've made them over about 15 years and they've never been shown together. So this is quite an occasion. Yeah. What was that effect of seeing them all together?
Well, I think. I didn't realise they'd done so many, I suppose, and you kind of think it's good to think you haven't wasted your life. I suppose you've got something to show for waking up every morning. But
do you feel that way? Just spending a lot of time at home, spending a lot of time in the studio. Do you sometimes wonder what you're doing?
Well, yes, it's a very sort of selfish thing to do in a way. Like you by yourself, and I think it is a selfish thing to do. Like, it's a form of therapy for me, I suppose. I just do it because I enjoy it. So,
well, I mean, I might open that up to the audience, because do you feel this is a selfish practice? I feel it's a very generous one. That just seeing people in the space, the amount of time that they spend with the work, they're obviously getting something. So
that's sort of a side effect of what I'm doing. Like,
okay. Yes.
I still look. Even if they weren't shown, I think I'd still do it. Like, I may, if I wasn't showing, I suppose I'd just have them all stacked up against each other in the garage. But
well, that would be selfish, yeah. Maybe we could talk about what makes this series different, because I think a lot of the people in the crowd would know your work quite well. It's a lot of your painting is quite. I'd say domestically sized and domestically themed quite often.
This series I think I mainly did. The first idea came when I read somewhere that people go to a gallery and they spend about 15 seconds looking at a painting. So I thought I'd come up with a way of making people spend more time looking at a painting. And I think if you have so much information, that you're forced to look at it. So, and I think they're very successful like that, because every time I've seen them anywhere, there's always a crowd of people. So that was I think the tactic worked in that way.
So it wasn't that you wanted to say something different, it's just that you wanted to hold people for longer. Is that right? Was there something else you wanted to say? Did you? I suppose because you tend to focus on very sort of small moments that people would tend to ignore, I guess, or overlook.
Well, it's a bit like Graham talked about making your work accessible. Like, I think that I see these paintings as very democratic in nature, and that they appeal to almost everybody in the world, which I think is good, because often some artists just like to think their work is being very esoteric and just appealing to people who are sophisticated enough to understand it. So I think that I come from a very working class background, maybe that's something to do with it, but I'm sort of an outsider and an insider in the art world. That's how I see myself. So.
Yeah, good. I was interested to ask you a similar question, actually, Graham, because originally the Rosie Project you wrote up as a film script, and I guess a novel, you get a lot more words. Films are visual storytelling and scene by scene, and so maybe a little bit like Noel's map painting, shifting it from a script to a novel is, I don't know, they just operate in a different way.
Well, it gave me an opportunity to take another, yet another look at it. When I talked to Noel about the creative process, one of the things I was interested in was how much reworking he did, because I do a great deal of reworking. Donna Tartt, who wrote The Secret History and The Goldfinch, says you can't cheat, if you like, the layering you get from doing something over and over again over a long period of revisiting it and so forth. And I discovered that Noel works in quite a different way. That Noel tends to do it once and move on. But I think in doing a series, you see, I don't do a series of books. I don't do 10 different versions of the Rosie Project or romantic comedies or Asperger's characters. Whereas Noel will do a series of thematically linked paintings, which is to me a little bit like the same sort of process, but with a different sort of outcome.
Yeah, but these paintings are, I suppose, they're different from my normal works in that they kind of compose themselves just according to where they're geographically situated on the map. So if you want to do, you have to put the town where it is. So you don't make the same aesthetic decisions you make with other works. They compose themselves in a way, in a mathematical way almost. So.
And maybe when you sort of locate that geographically, those words set up whole scenes, whole emotions in a way that just a single painting, you couldn't compress all that. You wouldn't have such imagination, or wouldn't invite so much imagination from the audience.
These paintings, I think, especially when there's just text, I think the audience has to sort of, if you look at the first one, the race courses of Australia, I think everyone knows what a race course looks like. You have an idea, and when you see so many that you can then you can visually sort of transport yourself to different parts of the country and think that, there's jockeys there, trainers, bookmakers and everything, so you need your imagination a bit, which is good, I think.
I'd read it as the creative process happening in a different place. So when I write a book, I've already got a very clear plan as to what I'm going to write. So as I'm writing, I'm not creating the story anymore. I'm working on the detail of it. And in the same way, the race courses are fixed. You know where they are. Yeah. So your creative energy isn't going to say, well, where will I aesthetically place that race course? It's there. Your energy is going into the execution of what around that picture.
And with my normal paintings, I normally do in one sitting, like a day. I work very thin paint. Whereas these, I work on. Some of them take me months to do. So you just work on them when you have a bit of spare time. So
that's good. I suppose people in the audience now, you've seen. Hopefully, you've been through the exhibition already, and you've seen the slides going through in the background. In my essay, I broke down the series into certain categories of nature and memory and infrastructure. Yeah. But I don't know, sometimes I feel like maybe I was a bit heavy-handed in that, because maybe you don't, maybe you weren't that prescriptive.
No, I didn't mind that, but I think that's something curators do. They do like to categorise things. It's sort of
such a mystery otherwise. Also, I don't get paid if I don't do it, so
another kindred spirit here.
Because I don't always often agree with how they categorise artists, because often artists don't necessarily fit into a neat box, and the particular category of naive artist and outsider artist is someone that is often, people are on the fringe of both areas. So because naive is such an interesting word to use, because I get that a bit. I get told I have naive qualities, and when I get asked that question, I usually say that's a very naive question. So that usually shuts them up. So
that's yes. So are these kind of naive paintings, then I want to ask you, I mean, they're always in the same format, apart from the New Zealand painting and some of the more personal ones. They're a shoreline, an outline that you can see from a distance with a different subject overlaid. So maybe that's the thing I couldn't work out about these paintings until now on stage, is that maybe the subjects are naive subjects. Maybe they're obvious subjects. What do you look for when you're trying to get the right subject for a painting?
But what does naive, how do you describe naive? What does it mean to you?
Is it, well, they're outsider subjects. They're very matter of fact, and they're probably not what you would expect to see as a standard contemporary art subject.
Well, I suppose you look, I call them landscapes, I suppose, and when you think like Australia, when I first went to art school, we were taught art was, in Australia, was mainly about the landscape. You know, Drysdale and all the early painters, so this is another way of looking at landscape, I suppose. So, like, I find a big thing more interesting than a gum tree, I suppose, to paint. So, and it says something about our country, our people, I suppose. So,
well, in that spirit, I think one of the things that you picked up on, Graham, in your text is how much invention there was within the series, because even though they're all, you know, map series, works like The Self, which is the autobiographical graph, and even some of the more plastic paintings like Australia in Reverse, which you painted backwards freehand, was it? Wasn't projected or? No.
I've never, they're all freehand,
Yeah,
as you can see. I probably would not use this as a map if you got lost.
No. So how important is that aspect of invention for you both? How do you do it? How do you keep things interesting?
Well, for me, it's just doing different things. You talked about how I do a lot of ceramics and I jump from scale. That's what keeps it fresh for me, is that because you want to wake up every morning and enjoy what you're going to do. So.
Do you know what you're going to do when you get up? Have you just set up a studio with all these different stations?
I have a vague idea, but how I work, how I describe doing a painting quickly, I'll start a painting. If it doesn't work, I'll just wipe it out and I'll start a new one. So,
and
I haven't got a lot of patience. These are quite different for me. Like you need a lot of patience for these, but. So I've done like 18, I think, in 15 years. So.
How about you, Graham? Do you know what you're going to do at the start of the day?
Look, you have an outline of what you're going to do, but I think you're still it doesn't stop you being creative. You're never doing something that's just purely mechanical. I mean, Noel was talking about just where he refills the brush, basically, you know, and that's going to change the look of the text and so forth. And he's able to concentrate on that because he knows what he's, you know, perhaps what he's going to write. And then there's the creative part about, you know, what text you're going to write in the first place and how you're going to place it. So you work at different levels of creativity. I mean, for me, there's one level of creativity when you come up with a concept, and another one where you start outlining a story, another one where you form a sentence, and, you know, all the time you're being creative, but in different ways.
So these would really stand out within your practice, which might be more impromptu, I guess. How much
more
research?
Instinctual, yeah.
Yeah. How much research would go into an average painting here? How long would you have to work on it before you could
according
start?
to when I did them, like the very first one, the racetracks, there was sort of no Wikipedia, or the internet was just kind of getting started. So it took a long time to find out where all the racetracks were. I had to write letters to post offices all over Australia, asking them if they had a racetrack, and most got back to me. So it took a long time. Would have taken more than a year to get all the information for that. Whereas some of the other ones, was a bit more easier to get the information. So.
And big things, you did the same process for big things.
Yeah, big
well,
things. Yeah, well, I had to write to the post office again. So.
I had it in mind because I'm quite interested in technology and the way technology shapes your life and our lives, and you're kind of a curiosity to me because you don't have a mobile phone. And does that mean you don't have a GPS as well? Do you use it?
No, I don't have a GPS.
No. Okay, because I sometimes think.
What is it?
You're not that naive.
My boys went to a GPS school. Is that what it is?
So, I mean, sometimes I think if you had the thought to make these paintings today, would you have, or has the world changed that these paintings?
Yeah,
are?
I think this has a lot to do with when I grew up, and I was in the Scouts, and I got introduced to maps in the Boy Scouts. I think we used to got taught how to use a compass, so you sort of. I remember part of one badge I had to get, you just got dumped in the middle of the bush with two other younger boys, and you had to, take them from A to B just with the use of a map and a compass through the bush. So that might be about the first time I ever saw a map. But I've always just liked the look of maps.
Do you think maybe that sort of working class background that you talked about, and maybe not having a huge family involvement in the arts, were things like maps and the more sort of popular illustration forms important to you growing up?
Possibly. Like we didn't have, there was no art in my house at all. I don't think I ever saw my parents with a book. So it was only when I started studying architecture. I did 2 years at Queensland Uni before they told me to move on because my drawings weren't very good. But so
not very good building plans, but very.
I couldn't get the hang of the rapidograph. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, rendering was quite important, I suppose, in those days. But
that's good. Maybe this is an open question to you both, since you're both creative practitioners. Is there a certain resonance that you want from these paintings, Noel, and from your other paintings? Are they sort of philosophical objects, thought objects for people, or are you more interested in the emotional aspect? Different works try to engage audiences in different ways, different faculties.
Mean what, the effect to me or to people? Or?
Yeah, I suppose. Do you have much concern for the audience in terms of?
Well, look, when I mainly work for myself, so I've got if I like it, that's the main thing, and if other people like it, that's good. If they don't like it, well, doesn't bother me that much. So I don't think I've ever sort of painted to please an audience or please a dealer. I've never had any sort of commercial dealer tell me what they want to be painted. I just sort of send it down, and so I just work mainly for myself. So
yeah, I think that's a great way to be. Graham, are you much the same? Are you?
I want my books to be read, but I never think of an audience beyond myself when I'm writing. They say if you can't make yourself cry, then nobody else is going to cry with what you've written. My mentor, Tim Ferguson from Doug Anthony All-Stars, was a comedy mentor. He said, make them laugh, make them cry, make them think. But I'm really trying to make myself laugh and cry and think when I'm writing, and if I do that for myself, I'm going to be pretty satisfied. And if the rude public don't get it, well, to hell with them, Yeah.
Fair enough. Talking about the rude public, are there any questions from the audience? Are there any works perhaps in the background that people have noted that they'd like to know a bit more about, or that people have been through the show? Yeah. You're not a rude public, by the way.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure to hear from you today. I'm interested in, I actually think there's a link between Graham and Noel in terms of data modelling, because these are interesting models of data, and I wonder if you've ever thought of them that way. Like there's the data selection and what you're going to include and what you're going to exclude, and then decisions about how you map it and how you present it and how that might be interpreted at the other end. Do you think of it that way, or?
What actually is data modelling, though? How would you describe that?
I was hoping nobody was going to ask me that. It's data. What I used to call, the field I used to work in was database specification. You would say, we're going to build a database, so we will need to organise it in the following way. We'll need to have a table for petrol stations. We're going to need another place to keep a record of race courses. And for each petrol station, well, a bit like your toilets one, where you said, well, what attributes of a toilet do I want to record? Quality of the toilet paper, cleanliness, and so on. That's classic data modelling stuff.
All right, okay. So if my painting career doesn't work out, I can...
Career as a data modeler?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. No.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't really... I've never thought of it in those terms, but I just sort of... For me, it's just like a common sense way to do something, I suppose. Sort of, it's an organisation, and as I said before, they kind of they just compose themselves because they, a town is where it is, and there's almost no, in some ways, there's like no creative thinking in them in a way. It's like, they're just like mathematically composed in a way, I suppose.
Is that a relief from your regular practice?
Yeah, I think that's why I started doing it, because it was that.
So just to go back to that idea of data modeling, though, obviously in the field you're working with much more complex material. I guess that's why you use IT and computers and that level of organisation, is because you couldn't work it out on a painting. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess, I don't want to push it too far. I mean, we would do something like the toilets, paint classification, but you just cover a much wider area if you wanted to do it. If you wanted, so this is quite a small data model in that sense. I'm actually sort of more interested in a comment about the lack of creativity, if you like, because I think what's evident is I think sometimes we don't know we're being creative. That we set out to do something. I set out to simply tell a story, and when I look back, there'll be stuff that is filtered up into that story, stuff that I've got on my mind that has found its way in unconsciously. And there's also the craft, that if you know what you're doing, then there'll be hopefully some nicely crafted sentences, just because I've practiced that, and the quality of your writing, the visuals, and that sort of thing are all going to be a product of where you've come from. So even though you say, not too much creativity in that. Something's going on.
Yeah, I suppose.
Come on, I'm helping you out here, Noel.
You lost me there.
Well, talking about sort of organising things, when we were organising the show, you were very keen not to do it chronologically and not to do it my way, in terms of building the theme. So what do you look for in a hang?
That was mainly, I think, to do with I didn't really know how, until you get all the works in a room, you don't really know how they're going to look next to each other. So I kind of like the idea of having it chronologically, because it shows you the journey when you do it. But when you put them on the wall, they don't necessarily look best together next to each other. So
it was more of an aesthetic driver, balancing the room.
Well, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to commit.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you're still not committing. No, but it looks fantastic. And I think what's interesting is that it slows people down. So it's almost like you're layering that effect of presenting so much content that people are compelled to stop and read it, but then also to break it up and layer it, that they spend even more time.
I suppose some of the paintings, when you start them too, they like this one, for instance, the big things. Like, I wanted to originally have an illustration for every big thing, but the size that I picked to do them, after a while I realised they wouldn't all fit on there, and I wanted to have the big thing beside the town, but that got out of hand too. So I kind of lost control of that as I went, but I didn't bother changing it. And see, that whole list on the corner there, I wouldn't never been able to fit all those in, so I did make that decision as I went along. So.
And this was about the third or fourth book?
Yeah, third or second, I think. Yeah.
So did you get a little bit more organised as you went on? That you sort of started to discover some of the problems of making them?
I generally don't like. I like to just let it.
You like to
grow
invite
itself.
the possibility of problems.
Yeah, because you get these great arrows that sort of go all around the place.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing when you go up to a painting, you're made to look very closely. I like to do that in galleries, always look at paintings very closely, and which a lot of people don't do, but I'm always getting told by the guards to move back. But these, if you look up really closely, you can see the brush stroke, when you load up the brush, then someone thought they'd been done with a pen. But with the brush, you've got to keep on loading the brush. When you look up close, you can see how the thickness of the text gets, so it goes in and out, which is another sort of rewarding thing if you look closely at it, I think.
I think even our conservators were very impressed with your penmanship, writing abilities. Are there any more questions from the audience? We still have a little.
It wasn't so much a question, your comment about what's naive and what isn't naive. And in Spain, you know, naive is art brut or outsider or naive, etc. But in Spain, they call it art of the sacred heart. And I wonder whether the engagement that everyone has is that they can feel that all of these things are people with great passion. It is that sacred heart. Whatever the passion is, they'll find it in these things. Is that true?
Well, Sacred Heart is a good Catholic term to use, but Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, because I was brought up a very strict Catholic, I can still remember that image of the Mary with her chest torn apart and the heart shown. But yeah, I'd like to think that I have that. Yeah, so. Passion for racehorses or passion for anything, and people will find it. Yeah.
I think that's a good, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think what I said about it, if you wake up in the morning, you want to sort of spend your time doing something you enjoy. So.
Very good. Are there any more questions from the audience? Oh, there's quite a few. Okay, maybe we'll pass it around.
Have Google Maps been in touch wanting to template any of your work?
Not yet, but I did, when I did the male public toilets of the Sydney CBD, someone did approach me that wanted to do an app of it, but I haven't, they haven't got back to me, so I don't know. So far, yeah.
Could you explain where did the map in reverse come from, the idea?
I don't know for sure, but it may have been when one of my sons, Emil, was in year 5 at his school. I asked the teacher if he could get all his classmates to draw a map of Australia. And because I know when I grew up, when I went to primary school, we always had a map of Australia on the back of the wall, so you kind of had an idea. But the things that came out from this school were pretty embarrassing. They didn't seem to know much about Australia at all. And one boy actually did the map in reverse, which I thought was a pretty strange thing to do. But when I did it, it's funny, as soon as you see it, you know it's Australia, even though it's totally back to front. There it is. So. But someone sent me I sent someone an image of the show, and they sent me an email yesterday saying that Oscar Wilde said when he didn't want to travel to Australia because he didn't want to come to a country that looked like a packing crate. So no, I couldn't actually. I've never seen a packing crate that looks like Australia. So it's typical Oscar Wilde, hey. But.
I might be able to wind up with one more question, or maybe it's just a comment. But I think that what's interesting in the end for this series, seeing them all together, is that it gives you a sense of being a citizen. It gives you a sense of belonging to something. It strips away some of those individual concerns and maybe some of those more esoteric dialogues that we have. Was that important to you with this series? Is that something you've noticed? Was that maybe a task for you to get away from some of those other dialogues you have with your work?
Yeah, I probably haven't thought about it in those terms, but no, it's just a description of us as a country, I suppose. It's just like there's many more things I could do if I wanted to. There's so many things, and I think I will do some more maps, but Haven't just decided what data to use.
Landscape mapped 2 coming soon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we'll wrap it up there, but we will have some book signings in the corner for the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so. So please help me thank Noel McKenna for... a great talk, a great exhibition, and Graham Simpson for lending his time, his expertise.